Well, last week we put out a piece of content that talked about the average compensation of pastors all over the United States, and we got hundreds of comments on that. And to my surprise, the vast majority of those comments insisted that pastors were overpaid. I couldn't disagree more, and in this conversation, we're going to unpack 9 reasons why your pastor is actually underpaid. Let's do this. Well, hey guys, I'm Thomas.
I'm Ian.
And today we're talking about 9 reasons why your pastor is actually underpaid. I think it should be a good conversation. It comes from a recent video that we did where we took some of the stats from Lifeway Research. We'll link to that video here in the show notes, so you should be able to see that up here and then also down below if you're watching on YouTube. That was really an interesting conversation. I was surprised by actually how much it seemed like pastors were being paid. Because I kind of hear the reputation, but I was really surprised when we released that video and some of the other shorts that we made around that video about some of the feedback that we get. And one in particular on Facebook just went viral for us. Hundreds of thousands of people viewed it and hundreds of people commented on it. And the comments were pretty mixed all over the place, but I would say they were definitely on the side of pastors make too much money. That's what the comments mostly said. Or let me just read some of them. We pulled out a sampling of some of the most common ones that we got here. So number 1, here's just a comment. Pastors shouldn't get paid. That's all they said. Pastors shouldn't be paid.
Nice.
How about the fact that no pastor or any person with a position in a church should be paid? This is exactly what God's word talks about when it says, heap to themselves teachers with itching ears. So I'm not exactly sure. We did a podcast episode talking about you should always quote where in the Bible it says something and be better for you. So another one, no pastor should ever get paid. Here's this one says, mine, speaking of their pastor, mine takes a vow of poverty. Someone who probably isn't a Christian says that's a lot of money for storytelling. Then there's and that's money that doesn't go to help the poor. All that money, we broke it down to what it was. This next person says our pastor gets $25 a week. That's what that pastor makes there.
Oh, wow.
So, and then good luck. Here he says, this one was interesting, I thought. When Christianity went from Jerusalem to Rome, it was a movement. When it went from Rome to England, it became a religion. And it went from England to America, it became a business. Kind of commenting on that person's thoughts on, just the finances and even talking about it. So, so you and I come from a ministry background. Ian, I've pastored for 18 years of my life. And I come at this as someone who has never been a full-time pastor. I've always been bivocational. So I have not experienced... I've never made a lot of money from churches, and I'll be pretty open about it. So the most I ever was paid at a church, I believe, was $36,000 a year. So by American standards, that's a pretty low wage. It was technically for full-time work, but they allowed me to do other work on top of that. Everybody knows that if you're in pastoral ministry, even if we call it part-time, like it's not like the job requirements go down just because it's part-time. If you're leading a church and you're the lead pastor there, like you just need to do what needs to happen with things there. So all lead pastor assignments are full-time. It's just sometimes you can do other work on the side of that there. So here's what was interesting though. In that study, it broke down and there was all kinds of numbers. We did a deep dive again, so you should go watch it. We broke it down based on education level and years of experience and size of the church. But the number that was surprising to people is that the total compensation package for the average pastor, and it doesn't mean median pastor, but the average, so it has some very highly paid pastors in there too, but the average compensation for a lead pastor role, including benefits, housing, all that stuff, was $90,000 a year. And I'll admit, that sounded like that was higher than I expected. This is a reputable study from Lifeway that seemed really high, but I was surprised by all the pushback that people felt like that was too much to be getting paid, and pastors should be paid like this person here says $25 a week. Those kinds of numbers were just nuts to me. So anyway, we wanted to take do a whole episode just dedicated to why we think pastors in most cases are actually underpaid. I feel like $90,000 a year sounds actually pretty good. Like that sounds like that's a fair compensation. And the numbers seem to bear that out, that that's kind of the average for people. But for all those people that are saying that's way too much, that's insane, pastors should make $25 a week, they shouldn't be paid at all. We wanted to take a second to talk about why we think that if you're in that camp, why you're wrong, and why we think you should be actually paying your pastors more. So does that sound, anything to add before we dig in?
Right. No, I think we should dig in because I think we have some really good meat here to point out as to why they should be paid. Why
don't you kick us off then? You can go ahead and do the first one.
Yeah, I will. Well, first of all, pastors have a wide range of responsibilities. That comment that you just read about getting paid just for telling stories, they do a lot more than that. Pastors are not just up there once a week on Sunday, just giving a message that they wrote on Friday. I mean, my goodness. And let me just take a step back. You know, I've worked with thousands of pastors literally for well over a decade. And the average pastor that I speak to is doing more than just preaching every Sunday. Yeah. I mean, they have pastoral care, counseling. Often they are always just, flying by the seat of their pants, for lack of a better word. They handle administration as well. So they are doing a lot more. They have different skill sets and doing a lot more than just preaching or telling stories on a Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's so many responsibilities that someone has to do. It's funny you mentioned that. Like, so when I was a kid, I told my parents when I was like 8 years old, that was my 8-year-old understanding of it, that I wanted to be a pastor when I grew up because I only have to work one day a week. That was kind of the joke on things there.
That's right.
So like that's your time where you're on display, I guess. But it's it is, you have to have so many different there's so many different responsibilities. You're running an organization if you're a lead pastor, and you're responsible to a council or a board on top of that. Right. And you have to bring emotional support and grief counseling and all these. It's just
numerous meetings, so much. Yeah, absolutely.
So many responsibilities that most jobs out there that you would have a much narrower focus. Your job is to do one specific thing or a few things very well. It's such a different variety of different responsibilities. So that's one. Second one is work hours. Pastors have can be very challenging work hours at times. So, let alone you never get Sundays off unless you're Seventh-day Adventist, which maybe you do get Sundays off. But you don't get your day of worship off, generally speaking. You have to take midweek worship times. And I find that you are on call just about 24/7. People usually are respectful enough to not be calling you at 3 a.m, but some of these small town pastors, that you're the person that people call when there's a deep crisis or need, and there's nights where you're going to get called in. And I think wise pastors will set boundaries on this, but especially pastors of smaller churches, it's going to fall on you, and your work hours are not going to be something you have full control over. So that on-call part of it, I think that's worth some compensation for that.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of the pastors I consult with are working too much. They need that day off or that Sabbath day of rest or a couple of days off, to be effective. A lot of them are flying by the seat of their pants, like I said, and they're stretched past 5:00 p.m., and they, matter of fact, might be doing more after that hour as people need counsel or help after work hours. And so, they definitely,
I think in working with pastors, like I think that there's a lot of them that struggle to have a Sabbath. Like that's something that is,
of course.
If you took a survey of pastors, I'd say just a very narrow percentage of them would have a dedicated day of rest where even those days, like when they have a day off, it's not really a day of rest like we should be having. They're often trying to make everything else in their life happen and come together. So, pastoring is a lot of work. So get the next one for us, Ian.
Education requirements. I mean, a lot of times people think that, pastors didn't go to school, or they just kind of they're good at the gift of gab and speaking, and that's what got them into it. No, I mean, a lot of them have advanced degrees in divinity or theology, and a lot of them, they've gone to Bible college. They've gone even past that and getting master's like degrees, and that's cost them money as well. So a lot of pastors have very high education levels, so they've put in that time and work just like many doctors or lawyers do, and so they deserve to be paid for that.
Yeah, I think so too. So some churches require it. It's kind of a funny thing. There's a meme going around, or a handful of memes that I'm seeing online, of just these churches that have these ridiculously lofty requirements for their future pastor. They're asking for a man who has, who's in his early 30s and has a doctorate degree in this, and has a wife who's willing to work full time with him and not get paid for it, and just there's people that don't really exist, right? There's just this, and the pay is going to be $25 an hour or something like that. Is the pay. So, yes, your education requirements. Not every church is going to have this. I think that most would like to see a pastor that has a minimum of a bachelor's degree in some kind of a theological area. Many are starting to require master's degree, in some cases doctorates. We did do a breakdown and found that pastors that have that level of education are in general paid more. But it costs a lot of money to go to school. It costs years of your life, and there's an opportunity cost. I invested 5 years and about $55,000 in my pastoral education 20 years ago.
And that was 20 years
to go to the same school that I went to, it would probably cost you, if you were able to do it in 4 years, you would probably invest $120,000 now. And that's a very affordable Bible school to be going to. So there is huge cost. I'm hearing more and more pastors that are going into the ministry, and they're being offered first-time wages of $30,000 a year, and they're already saddled with $50,000 in student debt, and it's just all kinds of challenges that come with that. So education requirements are part of it. Next one is cost of living. I find that churches a lot of times have not given their pastors raises in the last couple of years, where the actual cost of goods over the last few years of this high inflation environment we've been in have been up over 20% in total. It's almost like you had a pay reduction of 20% if you think about it that way. So the cost of living is going up, especially I live in Hawaii, and so our cost of living is the highest in the country here in Hawaii. From housing to food to really everything is expensive here. And so when you're faced with that, a lot of churches, I know it's just a real struggle at churches because it's not like the incomes are that much higher here in Hawaii, and therefore the church revenues aren't that high, and so meeting cost of living expectations are really challenging. But the point here is that cost of living is going up, and pastors' pay should be going up at the same time. You probably ought to pay your pastor more due to cost of living concerns. Yeah,
that's nothing to add there. That is what it is. I think that should make sense to many. And the next one is it's emotionally taxing, the emotional labor that a pastor goes through. I mean, when I read this one earlier in prepping for this, I was like, it made me think of police officers and firefighters. You know how that's one of the highest stress jobs. They're seeing obviously horrible things happening to people on a daily basis, or dealing with violence and those things. Now, while a pastor may not get shot at as much or deal with running into a burning house, they're dealing with so many people that have so many just horrible things going on in their life. Depression, of course, they're dealing with divorces, people on the verge of divorce. They're dealing with kids that have run away, all of the things that people got to remember that pastors, again, they're not just telling stories on Sunday. They're counseling people throughout a week, and they're taking on the problems of the people that they're ministering to. Yeah.
I got to tell you, it is emotional work, and I when I used to preach, there was times in my life where I would preach 4 sermons in a weekend. I was a pastoring at a 4-service church. And so that was emotionally draining. It might, like the 4 sermons might have taken a total of 2 hours of actual preaching, but it felt like I was hit by a truck by the end of that. It was just something that you're just exhausted from doing it. Preaching this weekend, I did 1 service and then I did 1 pre-recording. So I preached it to this very camera, I guess, when we did it. But that alone is exhausting. That's just going through that. That kind of emotional work is hard. Not to mention all the stuff you're talking about of how many times have I encountered stories of adultery and divorce and of abuse and all these things that you hear.
Suicide.
Really, suicide calls. And it's very, very taxing on someone. And I would argue that we aren't paying our pastors enough for the kind of issues that they have to deal with all the time there.
Yeah, that's good.
Next one is just kind of a general lack of benefits. Pastors are famous for having unfunded retirement accounts. And I'm not taking all the blame off pastors. That's on us, I think, to be funding our own retirement accounts and make wise decisions. But generally speaking, smaller churches especially do not have the ability to pull off all of the benefits that working at a Fortune 500 company that someone might get. So, we hear these stories of some of these tech companies nowadays where not only do they get benefits like health care and mental health care and commuting benefits and retirement accounts funded and vacation days, but on top of that, they have massages that are on site and free lunch every day. And I'm not saying that churches need to have masseuses on staff for their pastors, but I'm just saying that we need to recognize that a church of the average size church, we call it 60 or 70 people in the United States, we're not going to be able to have all of the infrastructure to do, in many cases, do health insurance the right way or have Roth 401k or 403b for churches, have those kinds of retirement accounts set up. And so you need to think about that. If you can execute benefits and do those well, and it makes sense financially, do it for your pastors. But if not, if you're not giving them any benefits, you can't compare someone down the street that's making $40,000 a year and has $25,000 in benefits with your pastor who's making $40,000 a year and has no benefits. So just kind of bear that in mind as you do it. But we need to take the benefits into consideration.
Agreed. And I think that's a good segue for this next one, is that a lot of pastors have a lack of job security. So not just benefits. I mean, things can be very unstable within church, with church or with that organization or that market, if you want to call it, because, there's not always steady revenue. And I know that's a business term, but churches' giving can just drastically drop and financial help for churches can. And that's just one reason, but there's so many different, there's leadership changes. There's so many factors that really where it's not just, pastor's going to be good for 30 years at a given church. There's just so many variables and volatility, things that can happen. So
this can really vary based on your denominational setting and some of those kind of things. Some churches or some denominations, like they intentionally will move pastors every 2 years. So you're a 2-year commitment at each place, and then you go off to the next one. We've worked with pastors like this. My heart breaks for them. That seems like such a I don't know. I'm outside of those kinds of things. Maybe there's some good reasons for it. I tend to not be able to see those very well. I love being able to be in community and know place, and it'd be so hard for a family to have to move around that often. So that alone is worth extra compensation, I would say. But there are also some denominations where you are annually voted on, whether or not you still have a job or not. They'll vote on it each year, and then you'll find out that day if you're going to work next year or not. So there are some challenges that come with that. But I think in general, many churches don't have the same kind of job security that other more stable, larger companies might provide for someone.
Yeah, that's good. Why don't you crack the next one there?
Next one is the level of personal sacrifice that pastors have to make. There are lots of things that I think one of the ones that I've experienced is youth sports that I had a daughter. I have a daughter still, but she no longer is in youth sports. She just graduated from high school, and so she's moved out of her youth sports days. And she was very good at soccer, and she was on a travel team for years and years, and I was unable to go to any of those. Occasionally, I was able to pull it off, but you know, there's a whole conversation, maybe a podcast episode about youth sports and how churches should deal with it. That's another conversation. But in our family, Mom was able to go with our daughter, and she would travel about 8 weeks out of the year, 8 weekends, to go to regional tournaments and all across the country. And that was challenging for us. And it was sad for me. It was a real personal sacrifice for me to not be able to see my daughter play as much. And, you know, there were sad things about that. I know you have kids in youth sports. You can relate to that, Ian. So, but that's just the beginning of it. There's so much personal sacrifice that comes with being a pastor. And so we need to count that cost when we're talking about compensation.
Yeah, especially in this day and age where I think everyone's just, compared to years past, so much more busy than they have ever been before, and so much more going on. So, well, last but not least, skill set versatility. So meaning, you know, pastors, again, we kind of covered this before, that they wear a lot of hats. Again, they're not just preaching once a Sunday, and you indicated some of them preach 4 times a Sunday, and that is emotionally draining. But there's a lot they're doing: counseling. They're doing a lot of other admin stuff. They're usually really leading other people a lot too, and meeting with other leaders. It's not just they show up and preach and everyone else is volunteering. So they have to be versatile. They have to be well-rounded, is another way to put it. And if you're well-rounded and you're doing more than just one thing, you deserve to be paid for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's running a business in a lot of ways. It's, you know, we don't want to make it too business minded. That's some of the complaints that people had about pastors, I guess. But it is in a lot of ways. You have to do a lot of business stuff. There's legal requirements that you have to look into, and legal protections you have to consider. There's accounting that most pastors, maybe it's probably not healthy that you're doing all the accounting. You probably want someone to help you with that, but you need to be responsible for budgets and reporting on that and figuring out those kinds of things. And you need to be the job of a fundraiser in a lot of ways. You're inviting people to give, and you're making sure that the ministry is financed, and you're an evangelist, basically a sales role where you're inviting new people to commit their lives to a huge calling right there with you. So there's so many different skills that are involved in pastoring a church. And I think, like you were saying, pastors need to be paid accordingly for that. So that's good. That's good stuff. Anything to add as we wrap up, Ian?
Pastors, we're on your side.
Yeah, share this with your counsel when it comes time for your review. I think I'll share this at the end. Is that there is that reputation, and I think we're so cautious in the church about people not thinking that we're money hungry. We want to avoid that at all costs. And there are those few horror stories of pastors that are flying on private jets and are making $7 million a year, and those kinds of crazy things. And I know for a fact that there's very, very few. There's a dozen of those in the world maybe that are in that kind of life situation there. And the vast majority of pastors, based on the comments that people that have said I don't make anywhere near that much, the vast majority of pastors are not in that same kind of a boat. And I would argue, again, that our main point here is that you should pay your pastor more. They're worth it. It's not to say that other jobs aren't important. They obviously are. There are many important jobs out there, but we believe that pastors, for the most part, are underpaid because of what they're called to do. So we want to know what you think, though. Let us know in the comments. If you still disagree, please do drop us a note as to why. Maybe you have a biblical reason why they need to be paid less. I'll disagree with you, but go ahead and put that in there, and we'll see what we get.
Maybe we've angered a lot of church board members and trustees, and that's maybe okay.
But that's okay. I'm all right with that. Okay. So we're on Team Pastor here at REACHRIGHT.
That's right. That's right.
If this has been helpful to you, or if it hasn't, and you want to see more of our content to get mad at, subscribe, hit that button down below, That'll help the algorithm and let other people know, and it'll let you know when we put out new content. We do this twice a week or so. We put out new pieces of content, so new long form. We also have all kinds of other content we do out there. So thanks, guys, for being a part of the Reach Right family, and we hope to catch you next week.
See ya.